Have you ever wondered how many secrets are buried beneath the corridors of the White House? Not the ones you read in the newspapers, but those that should never be discovered. What price do the powerful pay to hold the reins of a country? Some say the price is not just the soul, but sanity. So what would you do if distorted laughter echoed in the silence of the night, and you knew you weren't alone? The story I'm about to tell you is about something older than American power. Itself darker, more human. Are you ready to face the White House clown? It was his first day as an intern. Brandon Lowell, 23 years old, was determined to impress. As he crossed the gates of the White House, he felt a sharp chill run through his body, despite the bright sun. "First day of many," he murmured, as the imposing building seemed to watch him back. It was the chance of a lifetime, a stepping stone to something greater. But from the start, something felt wrong. The corridors were intimidating. Silence reigned supreme, broken only by the sound of echoing footsteps. As Brandon explored the building, he found small marks of wear on the floor and cracks in the walls that seemed to form patterns. "Everything here carries history," a guard commented as he passed. Brandon smiled, but something in the man's tone seemed to hide a shadow of truth. The first story came during lunch. In an almost empty break room, an older employee, Sarah, told him about the clown. "It was an inside joke," she said. "Every time something goes wrong here, we blame the White House clown. An old myth, nothing serious." Brandon laughed, but he noticed that Sarah's eyes avoided the dark corners of the room as she spoke. Night brought the first laughter. Staying late to review documents, he heard a low, irregular sound. Laughter that seemed pulled from a nightmare. He froze, trying to pinpoint the source, but it came from all directions, like a distorted echo. He convinced himself it was his imagination and decided to go home, but the laughter seemed to follow him to the exit. "Did you see something?" Sarah asked the next day, as if she knew. Brandon hesitated. "No. Why?" She shrugged, but her eyes were dark. "Sometimes things here have a life of their own. Just don't let them affect you." He tried to laugh, but the tension in the air was palpable. The forgotten files. A routine task led Brandon to the basement. Piles of boxes accumulated, filled with dust-covered documents. That's where he found a dossier marked only with the word laughter. Inside were reports of employees who heard inexplicable sounds and had hallucinations. Some disappeared without a trace, a face in the reflection. Later, passing by a window, he saw something that froze his blood. In the reflection behind him, a clown with an elongated face, a too wide smile, and sunken eyes, was watching. Brandon spun around immediately, but there was no one there. The security footage. Driven by curiosity and terror, Brandon accessed the corridor cameras. On the screen, shadows moved erratically. In one frame, he clearly saw the same clown standing in front of a meeting room, looking directly at the camera before disappearing. The laughter increases. Each night seemed longer, filled with distorted laughter breaking the silence. The lights flickered intermittently, and small objects, pens, papers, seemed to move on their own. He started sleeping poorly, his tired eyes reflecting his Growing fear. The reports confirmed the worst. After confronting Sarah about the records, she admitted knowing more than she let on. He appears when the weight of the lies becomes unbearable, when the sins can no longer be buried. Brandon wanted to believe it was just a legend, but reality was starting to unravel around him, hallucination or reality. While working at his desk, the lights suddenly went out. The room filled with deafening laughter. When he could see again, a message was written in red letters on the wall. "You shouldn't be here. The end of the beginning." Brandon's sanity was starting to fragment. Everything he knew about the White House and about himself was being eroded by something he couldn't understand. But one thing was certain: he needed to find out who or what the clown was before it was too late. The nights became endless. Brandon avoided going home, preferring to face the empty corridors of the White House rather than the silence of his apartment. The sound of laughter continued, sometimes low and distant, other times so close that he felt the chill on the back of his neck. He started noting the times and places where he heard it, trying to find a pattern, but everything seemed chaotic, as if the clown was toying with him. A new clue emerged by chance. While reviewing basement files, Brandon found a document sealed with an old presidential seal. Inside were reports from 1865, following the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Guards from that time described a figure with a painted face appearing near the president's room, laughing softly while the nation was in mourning. The document ended abruptly with a handwritten note. "The clown comes to remind. He is the price we pay." The evidence piled up. Similar reports of laughter and visions appeared in decades marked by crises: the Great Depression, the Watergate scandal. September 11th. The clown seemed to be more than a myth. He was a pattern, a constant that emerged in moments of national turmoil. Brandon began to realize that the more he researched, the more the events around him became strange. The game started to get personal. During a work break, Brandon noticed that an old photo on the wall had changed. It was a portrait of a group of employees from the 1960s. Everyone was smiling at the camera, except for a man in the back who seemed to be looking directly at him. The white painted face, the wide smile, and the bottomless eyes were unmistakable. Sarah became increasingly vague. When Brandon shared his discovery, Sarah hesitated. "You need to stop this. The more you look at him, the more he looks at you." She seemed genuinely scared, but wouldn't explain what she meant. Before leaving the room, she left a piece of advice. "Don't be alone. That's how he starts." The isolation intensified. Even among other employees, Brandon felt like he was being watched. Security cameras showed shadows that disappeared when he tried to follow them. Colleagues started avoiding him, some even whispering that he was getting weird. He no longer knew who to trust, or if he could trust his own mind. An unexpected visit. One night, while reviewing more documents, an elderly man appeared in the basement. He introduced himself as Albert, a retired archivist who used to work there. "You found the reports, didn't you? I knew someone like you would come. You shouldn't have opened that." The man seemed to know more than he was saying. But before Brandon could ask more questions, he left as quickly as he had appeared. Albert's words echoed in Brandon's mind. What did he mean by someone like you? Was it a coincidence that he was there, or had something more drawn him? Brandon began to suspect that his investigation was reactivating something ancient, something that should have remained buried. The White House began to change. Doors that were once open started locking themselves. The lights flickered in patterns that seemed to form words he couldn't decipher. The atmosphere in the building felt heavier, as if the very air was impregnated. With the fear of secrets accumulated over centuries, the guardian of truth, Brandon found more records about the clown. A text from 1933 described him as a guardian of sins, an entity that appeared to punish or remind the powerful of their mistakes. But the punishment wasn't just for the guilty. Anyone who dared to challenge the balance could be swallowed by the terror he brought, the first real appearance. While Brandon was typing a report, he heard the sound of something scraping on the floor. Looking down, he saw an old letter sliding towards him. The ink on the letter was fresh, despite the yellowed paper. Only 4 words were written. You will be next. The inevitable confrontation. Brandon knew he needed to discover the truth before he lost control of his own mind. He returned to the basement, determined to find Albert again, or any clue that would lead him to the core of this nightmare. But as he descended the stairs, he heard the loudest laughter yet. This time, it wasn't echoing, it was coming directly from behind him. The basement was different. As Brandon descended the stairs, he felt a chill that seemed to penetrate to his bones. The dim lights flickered, casting elongated shadows on the stone walls. He tried to convince himself it was just another late shift, but the rhythmic sound of laughter grew closer with each step. His heart pounded in his chest, and cold sweat trickled down his temple. A labyrinthine environment. Upon reaching the basement, the boxes and shelves seemed to have rearranged themselves. The usual path was blocked, forcing Brandon down a narrow corridor he had never seen before. The air there seemed denser, filled with something he couldn't identify. Every shadow seemed to move in the corner of his eye. But when he looked directly, everything remained still. Albert's letter. At the end of the corridor, Brandon found an envelope stuck on one of the shelves. He recognized it immediately. It was the same type of yellowed paper as the letter that had slid towards him earlier. Opening it, he found a simple message written in trembling letters. "Stop now. He is awake." The laughter became unbearable. Brandon tried to ignore the sound that seemed to echo directly inside his head. He began mentally reciting phrases from an American history book, anything to keep his sanity. But the laughter turned into words. "You don't belong here, Brandon." He dropped the letter on the floor and ran down the corridor, the trail of blood. Turning a corner, he stumbled and nearly fell. Looking at the floor, he saw a trail of fresh blood leading to a rusty metal door, one he had never noticed before. His trembling hand reached for the handle, but the door was locked. On the other side, the laughter stopped suddenly, replaced by an even more threatening silence, an overwhelming presence. When Brandon turned around, there he was, the clown. The figure was taller than he expected, almost touching the ceiling. The pale face contrasted with the empty eyes, two black caverns that seemed to suck all the light around them. The smile was so wide it seemed impossible for a human face. "You've read too much, Brandon," the figure said, its voice sounding like many voices at once. The psychological attack. Brandon tried to flee, but his legs felt rooted to the ground. The clown approached slowly, each step making the air around him vibrate. Images began to flood Brandon's mind, faces of people he had never seen, moments of betrayal, pain, and regret. He realized he was seeing the accumulated sins of decades, perhaps centuries projected by this entity. An impossible choice. Do you want the truth, or do you want to leave here with your mind intact? The figure asked, tilting its head in an almost childlike gesture. Brandon knew any answer would be a trap, but against every instinct of self-preservation, he murmured, "The truth." The clown's smile widened, exposing sharp teeth, the unbearable vision. The clown raised one hand and pointed at the locked door. In an instant, the lock opened by itself, creaking like a scream. On the other side, Brandon saw something he would never be able to fully describe. A whirlwind of contorted faces, shattered bodies, and whispers that filled his mind with pure despair. He fell to his knees, unable to look away. The final warning. The figure crouched down to his eye level. "You are brave, Brandon, but the truth has a price." Before he could respond, the clown touched his forehead with a cold finger, and darkness consumed him, awakening in the void. When Brandon opened his eyes, he was back in his office. The documents were organized, the lights worked normally, and everything seemed in order. But something was wrong. His reflection on the computer screen seemed to smile, even though he was serious. Doubt consumes him. Brandon tried to return to his routine, but the laughter was now inside his mind. He saw flashes of the clown in any reflective surface, and the words, "You asked for the truth," echoed in his thoughts. He realized the game was far from over. In fact, it had barely begun. Brandon's life was crumbling. The days began to blur together, each one more unbearable than the last. The laughter, the flashes of the clown, and the constant feeling of being watched started to erode his sanity. He no longer slept. His mind was stuck in a loop of what he had seen behind the door. Every time he closed his eyes, that whirlwind of horrors returned with even more clarity. Mirrors became enemies. In the White House bathroom, Brandon noticed something strange in the reflection. It wasn't just the clown, it was himself. His face seemed distorted, his eyes sunken, and behind his reflection, the clown watched, motionless, smiling disturbingly. He started avoiding reflective surfaces, covering mirrors, and wearing sunglasses even indoors. Sarah revealed what she knew. After a public breakdown during a meeting, Brandon confronted Sarah in the hallway, demanding answers. "You knew about this all along," he shouted. She hesitated, looking around to ensure no one was listening. "Yes, I knew. Everyone who works here long enough knows, but we don't talk about it because talking gives him power." Her expression was one of pure terror, the curse of the curious. Sarah explained that the clown was a guardian. He protected the darkest secrets of the White House, but he was also fed by the curiosity and guilt of those who got too close to the truth. "He's not just a figure," she said. "He's the sum of everything wrong with this place. Betrayals, crimes, decisions that cost lives. And you called him. His name is power." Sarah gave Brandon a final warning. Never say his name. Never. He tried to ask more, but she quickly walked away, murmuring, "You're already doomed." Her words echoed in his mind as he tried to understand what they meant. The message in the documents. Back in the office, Brandon found something that wasn't there before. A red folder marked with the initials LOT. Inside were yellowed pages with diagrams and maps of the White House, but a handwritten note caught his attention. The central mirror is the door. He didn't know what it meant, but he felt a chill run down his spine. The Oval Office mirror. Driven by an inexplicable impulse, Brandon went to the Oval Office late at night. The antique mirror that decorated the room seemed to pulse with a strange, almost living energy. He couldn't look away. He approached, and for the first time he noticed that he wasn't just seeing his reflection. The clown was there, but this time he wasn't smiling. A voice from the mirror. The glass began to vibrate slightly, and a deep, almost guttural voice resonated. "You want to know what they hid, Brandon? What they did to keep power?" He tried to step back, but his legs wouldn't obey. The voice continued, now in lower tones, almost a whisper. "Say my name and all will be revealed." The impossible choice. Brandon knew that saying the name would mean diving even deeper into this nightmare, but the curiosity was unbearable. He remembered Sarah's warning, but the desire to understand what was happening was stronger. Who are you?" he stammered, not realizing he was moving even closer to the mirror. The reflection came to life. The clown approached the glass from the inside, as if he were about to pass through it. The smile returned to his face, now wider than ever. "I am everything they hid. I am their mistakes. And you are the next to pay the price." Brandon tried to scream, but no sound came out, a fall into the abyss. In an instant the mirror shattered, but not like glass. It seemed to liquefy, and Brandon was sucked inside. The world around him dissolved into absolute darkness, while whispers and laughter echoed from all sides. He felt like he was falling endlessly. The other side. When Brandon finally stopped, he was standing in an environment that seemed like a distorted version of the White House. The hallways were covered in mirrors, and in each one he saw a different version of himself, each one more disturbing than the last. At the end of the hallway, the clown waited, holding a mask and extending it towards him. "Now it's your turn to guard the secrets, Brandon." The mark never stopped pulsating. Brandon could feel the heat of the scar even through his shirt. It was as if something was alive inside him, something that moved in rhythm with his heart. He tried to hide it, but soon realized it was impossible. Colleagues began to stare at him with looks ranging from fear to pity, but no one said anything. The files began to change. When he tried to continue his work, he noticed that the documents on his desk were not the same. Ordinary reports on infrastructure or public policies were now replaced by pages filled with indecipherable codes and diagrams. Some had handwritten notes. "You now see what they see." Dreams became a battlefield. Every night, Brandon was haunted by nightmares in which he was dragged back to the hallway of mirrors. But this time, he was dressed as the clown. He saw world leaders sitting around tables, whispering agreements and laughing at conspiracies, while he danced like a puppet to their commands. He woke up breathless, covered in sweat, the mark burning more intensely than ever. Sarah confronts him one last time. One afternoon, Sarah pulled him into a dark corner of the hallway. "You've crossed the line. There's no going back now, Brandon." He tried to argue, to explain that he only wanted answers. She shook her head, exasperated. "You don't understand. He won't let you go. Now you're a part of him." She held his hand for a moment before whispering, "I'm sorry." A second warning. After the encounter with Sarah, Brandon found another message, this time left in his drawer. It was written in the same red ink he had seen in the basement. "The mark binds you to him. Use it, or it will destroy you." He felt that the decision was getting closer, but he didn't know what the cost of using it would be. The first public breakdown. During a press conference, Brandon saw something that no one else seemed to notice. The clown was at the back of the room, watching in silence. When one of the journalists asked about a sensitive topic, he saw the clown shake his head in denial. Suddenly, Brandon felt his own mouth move, pronouncing words he did not control. "Next question," he said, with a smile that was not his own. Reality began to fragment. Reflections of the clown appeared in windows, computer screens, and even in the water cooler. At one point, he felt as if he were being pulled between two dimensions. One, the real world. The other, the hallway of mirrors. He no longer knew in which of them he was trapped. The forbidden notebook. A new item mysteriously appeared on his desk, a worn leather notebook with no title. When he opened it, he found pages filled with names, dates, and places. They were details of conspiracies and secrets from decades past. But on every page, at the end, there was the same signature, LOT. The revelation behind LOT. Brandon began to connect the clues. LOT was not a person, but an acronym, laughing over truth, laughing over truth. It was a cruel metaphor for the role of the clown, who not only guarded the secrets, but mocked human attempts to control or hide them. The mark reveals its purpose. One night, as he stared at his reflection in the mirror, the mark on his chest began to glow. He felt a surge of energy passing through him, as if he were being filled with an ancient and cruel force. "You are now a guardian," said the reflection, with the voice of the clown. "Welcome to eternity." The first test, a classified file, was delivered to him by an unknown employee. It was about an impending scandal that, if exposed, would shake the foundations of the government. He knew he should destroy it, but the mark burned, demanding that he keep it a secret. Brandon felt the choice approaching: obey the force that consumed him, or fight against it, even knowing that it could cost him his life. The weight of the choice. Brandon began to realize that the clown was not just a guardian, but a judge. Every decision he made was observed and judged. When he tried to tear up the document, he heard laughter echoing around him, loud and deafening. When he stopped, the laughter ceased, and the silence that followed was even more terrifying. Brandon felt on the verge of collapse. Days at the White House had become a waking nightmare. The mark on his chest burned continuously, reminding him of his connection to the clown. Every decision he made seemed to resonate in the environment, as if the building itself was alive and watching. He knew his sanity was hanging by a thread. The corridors began to change. Familiar passages turned into labyrinths. Doors that once led to meeting rooms now opened to dark, empty spaces where he heard incessant whispers. "You are one of them now," the voices said, each one more sinister than the last. Sarah disappeared. One morning, Brandon looked for Sarah to get answers, but her desk was empty. When he asked about her, his colleagues seemed confused, as if they had never heard of her. He searched the entire building, but there was no sign of her existence. Even her ID badge was not in the system. The truth about the mark. Brandon found another lost document, this time in his own drawer. It was an encrypted memo with only one clear sentence. The mark is a seal, but also a sentence. He realized he was not just a receiver of secrets, he was being molded to become part of the system itself. The clown confronts him again. One night, while walking down an empty corridor, the clown appeared before him. "You feel it, don't you? The power. The responsibility." Brandon tried to confront him. "You can't force me to do this." The figure laughed, a laugh that seemed to expand through the entire space. "I don't need to force. You've already made your choice." The final test. A political scandal of unimaginable proportions was about to be revealed. Brandon was tasked with reviewing the documents before they were sent to the media. He knew he had two options: let the world know the truth or protect the secrets, as the clown wanted. But the mark pulsed violently, as if warning that the wrong choice would have irreversible consequences. A warning in the mirror. While washing his face in the bathroom, Brandon saw a message written on the mirror in a dark liquid that looked like blood. "Choose wisely. Once you open the door, it never closes." He knew this was not just a warning, it was a threat. The weight of silence. Brandon decided to keep the secret. He destroyed the documents, burning them in an incinerator hidden in the basement. As the flames consumed the paper, he felt a momentary relief, as if he had spared the world from something terrible. But the silence that followed was worse than anything he had ever faced. The dark reward. The clown appeared again, this time closer than ever. He touched Brandon's shoulder, and for the first time, his voice was not mocking. "You understand now. Power is a burden. Welcome to the circle." Brandon felt an invisible weight settle on his shoulders, as if he had just inherited centuries of secrets. The final transformation. Days later, passing by a mirror, Brandon barely recognized his reflection. His eyes were deeper, his skin paler. He realized the clown's smile was now on his own face. No matter how hard he tried, the smile would not disappear. The new guardian. Brandon discovered that, like Sarah, he too was disappearing from the records. His name began to vanish from the systems, his existence being erased bit by bit. It was as if he had never been there. He realized he was being transformed into a part of the system, invisible but indispensable, eternity in the mirror. On the last night, Brandon went to the hallway of mirrors one last time. The clown was waiting for him, holding the same living mask. "It's time to take your place." Brandon put on the mask, feeling his face merge with it. When he looked in the mirror, he saw the reflection of the clown and realized that now he was the guardian. The corridors were quiet again. No one heard laughter echoing at night anymore. The heavy air that once seemed to suffocate the White House staff had dissipated. But those who had worked there long enough knew that the silence was never a relief. It was only the prelude to something worse. The new intern arrived. Ryan Miller, 22 years old, walked through the wide, brightly lit corridors, impressed by the grandeur of the building. It was his first day, and he couldn't hide his excitement. "Welcome to the heart of power," said an older colleague, with a smile that seemed forced. "Watch your step. This place has a lot of history." The laughter began again. On the first night, Ryan stayed late. He heard something strange, a low sound like distant laughter coming from the older corridors. He tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the building's acoustics, but something compelled him to check it out, an unsettling reflection. As he passed a mirror in the hallway, Ryan thought he saw something move behind him. When he looked again, there was no one there. But for a moment, he swore he saw a wide, distorted smile. The circle begins anew. In the basement, a red folder awaited Ryan, just as it had for Brandon months before. Inside were the same old reports, the same stories of disappearances and laughter. He felt a pang of fear, but curiosity won out. He began to leaf through the papers, not knowing that each page pulled him closer to the abyss. The clown watches. From the other side of the mirror, Brandon, now the guardian, watched in silence. His smile was eternal, frozen on a face that was no longer human. He felt no sadness, no joy, only a cold, unchanging sense of duty. He knew Ryan would follow the same path he had trodden. A new cycle begins. The laughter grew louder the next night, and more staff began to notice that something was wrong. But no one spoke about it, for they knew that speaking only made things more real. The price of power never vanishes. At the heart of the White House, in the invisible corridors where the darkest decisions are made, the clown's presence endures. He is not just an entity, but a reminder that absolute power always demands a price, and that price is paid in sanity, in blood, and sometimes in souls. Brandon's legacy. His name would never be mentioned again, but his work continued. He was now the guardian of secrets, a silent watcher who would never be seen, but whose influence was felt in every decision made in that building. The White House never sleeps. As the lights in the building went out once more, the laughter faded, until it disappeared completely. But in one of the mirrors in the basement, a reflection remained. Brandon, watching, smiling. He knew his successor was on the way. If you enjoyed this dive into the dark and disturbing secrets of the White House, don't forget to like this video and share it with anyone who also loves a good psychological horror. And now tell me, what would you do if you were in Brandon's place? Would you face the clown or give up before it even starts? Subscribe to the channel for more scary and visceral stories like this. Hit the bell to never miss a new nightmare. And remember, the real horror is closer than you think.